Eddington is a crime dramedy taking place 2 months into the COVID-19 pandemic. We follow Joe Cross, played by Joaquin Phoenix. He's the sheriff of a small town who very quickly becomes fed up with COVID-19 restrictions. He decides to take political matters into his own hands, going up against the town's mayor, Ted Garcia, played by Pedro Pascal. Joe battles him for public favor, but struggles due to the ever-growing conflicts surrounding the pandemic and social justice issues, all of which send the town of Eddington into a feedback loop of outrage. Okay. Please just skip this chapter if you just want the actual review to start already, but I can't not address the politics in this movie because that is what will get the most attention from a lot of people. Normally, I try to avoid covering movies that veer into heavy political territory because this is just a movie channel. It's entertainment based. I'm not here to boast about my own political views, so I've avoided reviewing movies like Reagan and The Apprentice, two movies that are made from very different political positions. So I'd like to think I'm not just being selective about the position a movie takes. I even threw out an entire review that I had prepared for the movie Sovereign literally just this week. I wrote the script, made the thumbnail, tapped my fingers a bit, and thought, what the hell am I doing? Why would I review this movie? No judgment toward the creators out there who do cover those movies. More power to you, but with my creative integrity, where my intentions are as a creator, that type of content does not interest me. What I'm saying is that my intentions with this review are not to tell you who is right or wrong in this movie. I am a human being though, and every single one of us has biases that we don't always recognize. So naturally, how I look at and break down aspects of this film will likely reflect my own biases, but again, my intention is to try and be as fair as possible. I'd like to think that writer-director Ari Aster is also not trying to tell you who is right, because with every position taken in this movie, people taking them are portrayed in some pretty unflattering light. I'm not gonna lie though, I keep going back and forth in my head about which side I think this movie leans more in favor of, because each side is depicted as worse than the other, but for different reasons. One could argue that it's slightly more left-leaning because we do spend the entire movie following a right-wing character who is more or less depicted as a bumbling idiot. Naturally, that will lead some people to believe that there is a large political motivation there, to paint the people who were anti-mask as morons. On the other hand, plenty of the characters who are pro-mask are just posturing, and sometimes characters who are fighting for social justice are depicted as wildly illogical. But then I start to think about how villainous the activity is from a right-wing character, but then I start to think about the third act and who that character is pitted up against. Funny thing is that since this movie premiered at Cannes, I have seen some people call it leftist propaganda, I've seen other people call it anti-left, and then I've seen some people call it high and mighty centrism. I am not personally interested in coming to a conclusion though, because I don't think this movie is trying to solidify a position from the great debates of 2020. And I don't think this movie is trying to take a snooty centrist position either. It's more so just trying to shine light on specifically the most disingenuous people who assume each of those positions. Honestly, it's kind of like South Park in that regard. I will elaborate on this later. No matter where you stand politically, whether you're left, right, or somewhere in the middle, I'm sure that you have met people in your life who you are embarrassed to be on the same side as. You know, the people who are motivated by insecurity and enter the conversation solely for social validation. So they step forward to try and be a part of a dialogue that they don't fully understand, and to you, they sound ridiculous. This movie mostly follows characters like those who speak before they think. It puts the spotlight on the most chaotic and disingenuous people from each side of the political spectrum. So at its core, this movie is just about inauthenticity. This movie highlights the nature of people who are not past crafting fabrications, exaggerating things, or shifting their identity to fit a more convenient or flattering narrative. Whether it's for monetary gain, political advantage, or social validation, these characters are constantly just performing. Through all of that, the movie's biggest byproduct is exploitation. The movie sheds light on the angles that people take for their own personal gain. Everyone is looking for leverage, and they're not just reacting to the world falling apart. They're trying to frame it in a way that enhances their own image. The levels of exploitation range anywhere between common and innocent, all the way to nuclear levels, where characters do some pretty messed up things for their own benefit. The most common tool used for this, and the biggest thing in this movie influencing these characters, is internet culture. Characters are constantly on their phones in this movie. Everyone's taking videos, either to protect themselves or exploit others, and characters are chronically online. They're always eating up news and scrolling through social media, reflecting how the vacuum of internet culture and thirst for belonging are shaping the way that people behave in the real world. And all of this is driven by insecurity because that's the root of pretty much all inauthentic behavior, the fear of being seen in ways that don't flatter us. And it's through our collective insecurities that we breed tribalism. We build communities around people who see the world the same way that we do, people who validate and comfort us. With a miraculous tool like the internet, it's easier than ever to form those communities. We can do it from our bedrooms, we can do it anonymously and without ever being challenged. We now stay connected more than ever, but mostly through people and platforms that keep us comfortable. That was especially true in 2020 when we were all locked in our homes with nothing but screens. We sometimes build echo chambers without realizing it. We get righteous and condescending, causing fights with our neighbors who ironically have been living comparably to us, just in different communities. The unstoppable force meets the immovable object and outrage ensues. We film, we post, we retaliate, we go viral, we turn real life into content, and we call it justice, creating a feedback loop of social chaos. And the worst of us, the likes of people this movie is shedding light on, will do anything to win an unwinnable social war, hence all the exploitation in the movie. This is all just to speak to this movie's portrait of how internet culture has reshaped the world, saturating us in digital warfare and constantly pressuring us to rise to the occasion. Sorry if that sounded a little bit unhinged, but again, this is all just in service of describing this movie's characters. Starting with Sheriff Joe Cross, he is very incompetent and lazy. He's clearly very comfort-driven by nature, so when mask policies come into play, he takes issue with the fact that his natural state has been disrupted. We see his train of thought that leads him into the movie's main political plotline, and it sort of comes out of nowhere. As previously alluded to, he's a guy who truly always speaks before he thinks. As our protagonist, he's a little bit of a wild card, which keeps the story interesting for a good duration, because he's kind of hard to predict, as are the people close to him. Then we have Mayor Ted Garcia, who is Joe's opponent through all of this. He's his political enemy and the embodiment of the progressive agenda. He takes the stock left-wing approach regarding COVID protocols and exploits that narrative in his campaign. While I liked the idea of him as the antagonist because it felt like a fresh direction in what initially seemed like a slightly left-leaning story, the plot takes a few unexpected turns, and honestly, I feel like we could have gotten more from him in the story. We also follow around a couple of kids, one of whom is the son of Mayor Garcia. They were surprisingly big players. They have their own conflicts as they take their stands in the fight for social justice, which of course tie into the main plotline because, well, you all remember 2020. I'm sure you can use your imagination. As for some of the side characters, like Joe's wife Louise, played by Emma Stone, her mother Dawn, played by Deirdre O'Connell, and Vernon, played by Austin Butler, they all seemed like they had the potential to contribute so much more to this story. With conspiracy theories being a large part of their dialogue, I was figuratively salivating over how they would influence the plot, but honestly, we were really left hanging. So the first half of this movie is extremely funny. It's very political, but it has a lot of great laughs. I personally laughed out loud several times. Again, it's very much like South Park in that it's a political satire that's also a little bit kooky and animated. Some of Joe's antics actually legitimately make him feel like Randy Marsh sometimes. There were bits that reminded me of actual South Park bits, like the Soto Sopa videos. You really feel how very small the town is, including things like the police force, which feels very small and seemingly illegitimate, and mostly everyone is kind of dumb. It's also pretty gruesome at times. The overall tone of this movie is more serious than South Park. It's much more realistic and dramatic, but the undertones are what make the comparison valid. So about halfway through, this movie shifts gears pretty hard, and it becomes a totally different movie, honestly, and that's where it kind of starts to lose its way. It might sound strange to say that it was stronger when it was a divisive political satire, but it suddenly just becomes a completely different type of thriller. There were some pretty big bomb drops in the story that truly compelled me. There were moments that left me utterly shocked, one of which left my jaw on the floor, but the story just completely shifts trajectory. And the last act just drags its feet so hard. It did not need to be as long and drawn out as it was. There was absolutely room to shave off at least a few minutes there. Really, that whole last act is just disorienting mayhem. At one point, I'm sitting there thinking, my God, what on earth happened to the movie that I was watching? It's also kind of a bit ridiculous who the final antagonist is. I guess it fits the whole live action South Park vibe, but I'm still sitting there thinking, oh, brother. The ending was kind of fun. It kind of feels like a Scorsese ending or a Yorgos Lanthimos bit, perhaps I would have appreciated it more had everything leading up to it played out differently. So I walked out of this movie looking back at it, ironically, the same way that I look back at 2020. I was thinking, wow, that was total madness. Ari Aster is a director who is really good at making his viewers feel like they are riding a roller coaster of strange feelings, and I can't say that this movie doesn't do that, for whatever that's worth. As for what this movie is trying to impart, I think it is seemingly trying to make two statements. The first being that the line between rational and irrational is blurry when it comes to our own behavior. And two, while it is important to stay informed and involved, drinking too much of your own Kool-Aid will loosen your grip on reality and utterly rot your brain. Honestly, I kind of struggled to land on a final rating. I'm gonna go middle of the road and say that it's fine, which seems fitting because this movie will certainly be divisive. This movie is for those of you who can look back at 2020 with a sense of humor. If you're at that point with it already and you're not easily offended, then you might enjoy this movie. Thanks for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you next week with my review of Fantastic Four.